Hello everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the double bass. Okay, so the double bass is the lowest and biggest string instrument in the entire orchestra and of the entire string section, as you can see here. It plays in the bass and contrabass range, that means low and very low range. The point is it's an extremely low instrument that's tuned to play extremely low. So when the sound that it creates are extremely low, and when you tune it, it's tuned to that very low range. So today I want to take a look at what its role in the orchestra is, what some of its repertoire is, how they're classified, and its overall structure, and then we can get back perhaps to talking about the other instruments. So okay, let's start with its structure, then we go on to some other things after that. So number one, this looks similar to a violin, but it is quite different. The most notable difference being it's very large. Just to give you a depiction of this, how large it is, this is a grown man standing next to it, and this is how you usually play the cello, the double bass. And you usually actually have a stool behind you like this. You sit in the stool where you're not fully standing up, but you have something to lean on like this. It's usually at this level, and you play it like this. So it's very tall. It's usually, this is an estimation, somewhere around 6 feet tall or 5.5 feet tall, around that height. And of course, you play it like this. Either you stand up and play it like this, right? Where you play, where your fingering is happening here, and your bow moves down there. It's a bow string instrument. Or you have a stool, which is a stool, so you slightly lean down, fingering up here, and bow down there, just like similar to a cello in some respects. Just break down its structure a bit more. Okay, so up here in this area right now, we have the scroll. Now it's a wooden piece which is called the scroll because it looks like a rolled up piece of paper. The top part right here, and this is all the scroll. And it houses the tuning pegs and the strings, the coiled up strings. And let's get into at least be perfectly to the tuning pegs. Now, until now the tuning pegs have just been very crude in that sense that they've been just a piece of wood inserted into two holes. Here we finally get some more sophistication, something similar to what you might see in a bass guitar or a regular guitar, where you have gears to turn it for you. So it's much easier to turn it, and you don't need any fine tuners unlike the other instruments, because these tuners are now more sophisticated. They're usually made of metal and they're fine enough. And of course these tuning pegs help you tune the instrument and change the pitch of the strings when required. And yeah, then the strings are coiled up here and they go down. And yeah, now we move on to this black bar right here, this black thing that's called the fingerboard, because that's where you place your fingers. Quite self-explanatory. You place your fingers to produce those different pitches, and you do it on the fingerboard. When you play higher up on the fingerboard, it produces a higher sound. When you play lower on the fingerboard, it produces a lower sound. And when you play an open string, it's the lowest sound that you can get. Okay, then we move down, and now the back of the double bass, a picture I don't have right now, but this back side, until it hits the body, this back side, right, is called the neck. And like all the other string instruments, the neck is shaved so that you can move your hand up and down easily. It's not varnished like the rest of it. It's completely bare. It's just wood, and you can move your hand so that you can move your hand very easily. Otherwise, if it was varnished, you would have a significant impedance. Okay, let's move down. We have the body of the double bass, which in some respects is quite similar to a violin, but at this point is quite different. I'm sure you can immediately tell that this is not just the shape itself is different from a violin. Forget about the size of it. The shape itself is different from a violin, as you can see. Okay, and as I said, just like all string instruments we talked about so far, it's essentially a wooden sandwich where you have a top plate and a bottom plate and a chamber for the sound to resonate, right? And that's the body of the double bass. That's why it's so thick. Then we move down, this fingerboard, great, body, and then we hit the F holes. Let's talk about the F holes. So these are these two integral sign like looking holes. Like these holes are called the F holes because they look like lowercase f's. If you can see the arches, you probably can't, but they exist. So they look like lowercase f's. They're called the F holes, and they are very important for. This is where the sound of the double bass comes out from. You hear the sound please come out from the F hole. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Then we move down further. We see the bridge, very important. The bridge, just like with all other string instruments, is a piece of wood which sort of juts out. It's not connected to the double bass in any way. It's its own separate piece of wood like this. It's about this big for a double bass, and it sort of juts out and it allows tension to build up in the strings, right? So that's where the tension of the strings is, and when you pluck the strings, that's where the sound comes from. That's also very important because, of course, it adds curvature. So now you can play each string individually. If it was flat, you would end up playing all of them. And also, we'll talk about how it benefits hearing sound, right? Then we move slightly further down, and we see this whole stretch here, which in this case has no fine tuner. It just houses the ends of the strings, keeps them tight. We move down, and here we have the A hole, and that's really about it. Now, one more thing to keep in mind is a lot of double basses do have one thing down here similar to a cello, where you can unscrew it and take out a metal rod essentially, which can go, and that's just to increase or decrease the height of the cello. I mean the double bass. And normally people don't use this because the double bass is tall enough on its own, pretty obviously. But in some cases, when you want the double bass, if you've got a smaller double bass like a 3/4 double bass or a 2/4 double bass, or 2x4 double bass, or if you are a very tall person and you want the double bass to be slightly taller, you can make use of this and get a small metal rod with a rubber foot to sort of jut out from the bottom of the double bass and elevate it due to that. Okay, that's all that there really is for the anatomy. Let's talk about how it creates the sound. That brings me to the bow. Now, I doubt it needs to be said that this is not a double bass bow. This is a violin bow. I didn't have access to a double bass or a double bass bow for this video, unfortunately, due to the fact that it's being filmed in the coronavirus pandemic. If there was no pandemic, I would have access to the instruments of my school orchestra, which I currently don't have access to, so we're stuck with a violin bow. Though the double bass bow is quite similar. It's just longer, it's about this long, or actually not that much longer, but a bit longer, and it's much thicker. So it's much thicker, and the width of the hair is also much larger. But the structure is similar. So once again, you have an arch here, and you have the hair coming down here. The hair is either synthetic or horsehair. You have the frog, and you have I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it's meant to tighten and loosen the bow. You hold the bow like this, with your thumb inserted here, and your 4 fingers across there. For violin, cello, viola, and double bass, the formula for the bow hold doesn't change. And once again, you can loosen and tighten the bow based on this screw right here. And once again, the way we create the sound with the double bass is by dragging the bow across the strings that cause the strings to vibrate. That vibrating sound, that vibrations travel down the bridge. That's why the bridges are also important. Those vibrations hit the bridge and travel down the bridge through them into this hollow space which is present. The double bass is obviously hollow. I don't need to mention that. Into this chamber, right? In the chamber, there's a structure called the sound post, which is extremely important. Helps the sound resonate properly. It bounces back and forth within the double bass, and once it resonates properly, it exits through the F holes, comes out, and now you get a big, gravelly, deep sound. If you would imagine, electric double basses don't really exist, but imagine, how electric guitar, if you don't plug it in, how it sounds, and acoustic guitar, how it sounds. It's the same thing. Similar, but this is a lot more sophisticated, whether it looks it or not. And that's how it works. Now, coming to when you think of bow to point, that's probably a bit sacrilegious. Okay, now coming to the role of the double bass. Now, once again, the double bass is a very, very low instrument. It plays in a very, very low register and has a very overpowering, powerful, gravelly tone to it. When you hear double bass, you can sometimes feel it in the chest. It's very low, it's very powerful. And such, it's usually not included in ensembles. For example, the string quartet, which is, you think is the string section, it consists of 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. It does not consist of a double bass, because the double bass sound is very overpowering, and this is not, you need many more violins to compensate for that. And in the orchestra, double basses do exist, however, because you have enough violins, violas, and cellos to compensate for its gravelly, very deep sound. But it almost never takes a solo role or a prominent role in the orchestra, but rather has a supporting role. It lays the foundation with a very mute, low, and powerful gravity tones. Sometimes they're rhythmic, sometimes they're long and sustained, but it sort of lays the foundation and makes the music sound much more whole and much more multifaceted when you have the double bass in there. And that it also gives very low harmonies as well. The low harmonies, the low harmonizing is usually given to the cello, but double basses are also capable of doing it. So once again, in a orchestral context, it plays a supporting role, laying the foundation and giving some of the lower harmonies, but very rarely has a solo role when we're talking about the orchestral context. Now, as a solo instrument, it's also very rare for it to have in context. You usually don't see much solo work for double bass out there. They're as sparse as viola solo works, perhaps the most sparse, but I'm pretty sure a double bass concerto exists somewhere, and so a double bass sonata also might. And I know that there are some solo double bass works, but my point is there's not that many, and nothing compared to the amount of repertoire that's there for cello, solo repertoire that's there for cello and or violin. So yeah, I thought I really wanted to cover for this lesson. That being said, from my side, thank you very much for joining this lesson. Hope you learned something valuable, you took some knowledge away from it, and I'm happy to have taught you. See you next lesson. Goodbye.